No one ever tells you how love can quietly erode your sense of self, like a moth drawn to the faint glow of a lamp, circling endlessly until it's swallowed by darkness. That's how I felt the day I first saw him, standing among the shelves of that tiny independent bookstore, as if he belonged to a forgotten era, or perhaps to a dream I'd had once but couldn't quite remember. I was 32, exhausted from a life of quiet despair, the kind that settles into your bones and muffles everything except the ache for connection, that relentless ache that makes you reach out even when you know better. The shop smelled of old paper and cinnamon, a scent that seemed to cling to the air and seep into your skin. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows, a gentle percussion that made the world outside seem distant, insignificant. I was scanning a shelf of poetry when I noticed him. He was leaning close, inspecting a dusty volume, but his gaze was fixed on me, too intense, like he was trying to memorize my face in one glance. His eyes held a strange, flickering light, part curiosity, part something darker, like a secret he refused to share. He approached silently, and there was a strange electric hum in the air, as if the universe itself had paused to listen. "You look like someone who's lost something," he said, voice smooth but edged with an odd timbre, like a whisper from a dream. I froze, unsure if I should be flattered or alarmed. His words felt rehearsed, yet perfectly tailored to the moment, like he'd practiced this line in a mirror. There was an unspoken pull, a magnetic force that made my skin tingle. He reached out, gently touching a stray strand of my hair, as if to measure its softness or perhaps to claim it. His hand lingered just a moment too long, and I caught the faint scent of sandalwood and something sharper, like a secret kept too long. Then he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my stomach tighten with a strange mix of thrill and dread. He gestured to the corner of the store where a flickering light cast shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. "I think you'll find what you're looking for here," he said, voice low and intimate. I noticed a small, folded poem slipping from a shelf nearby, falling softly onto the floor between us. I bent to pick it up, feeling the paper's fragile texture under my fingertips, and wondered if he saw the tremor in my hand. We talked for a while, the words flowing easily, yet beneath the surface, something felt off, like the harmony was just a thin veneer over something fractured. His eyes seemed to hold 1,000 stories, none of which he was willing to share, yet he knew too much about me. About my fears, my scars, my restless search for meaning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something I wouldn't understand until it was too late. As I left that day, the rain had stopped, and the world outside felt suddenly sharper, more vivid. I looked back once, half expecting him to be gone, but he was still there, watching from behind the glass. I wondered if that moment had been coincidence or design, if I had simply stumbled into a stranger's game. Back then, I thought it was all serendipity. Now I wonder if I was already caught in his web, drawn in by a flickering light I couldn't quite see through. And even then, I was beginning to realize I wasn't just lost anymore, I was being watched. He remembered the smallest things I said, as if my words were treasures he wanted to keep close. Later, he repeated fragments of my stories, twisting them into something new, almost like he needed to internalize them. It was as if my voice had carved a path inside him, shaping his understanding of us. I felt a strange comfort in that, a sense that I had become essential to his world, a missing piece he'd been hunting for without knowing. One evening, he shared a story about himself, something raw and vulnerable that he rarely revealed. He spoke quietly, voice trembling just enough to draw me in, as if revealing this secret made him more real, more human. I listened, captivated by how he matched my own confessions, as if we were two halves trying to complete each other in the dark. His eyes softened, and for a moment I believed we had stepped into a space where nothing else mattered but this fragile connection. He praised me in a way that felt oddly possessive. "No one sees the world like you do," he whispered, voice thick with admiration. His words wrapped around me, tightening like a promise. I told myself it was devotion, that he saw something rare in me, something worth protecting. But beneath the praise, I caught a flicker of something darker, a subtle claim to my uniqueness, as if I belonged to him in some unspoken way. One night, he reached out and gently took my hand, guiding it to rest on his chest. "Promise me you'll always tell me everything," he murmured, eyes searching mine. It sounded like a request, but the tone carried an unshakable command. As I nodded, I felt the weight of his gaze, as if he was quietly measuring my loyalty. I wanted to believe it was love, an act of caring, but a part of me wondered if it was something else, a need to control, masked beneath tenderness. He began to softly question who I texted or called. "Do they really know you like I do?" he asked, voice low but steady. I wanted to dismiss it as concern, as devotion, but I couldn't ignore the way his words made my skin crawl just a little. Still, I rationalized he was just worried. That's what love looked like, wasn't it? Deep concern, a desire to keep me safe. Yet, beneath that rationalization, I felt the faint whisper of something more insidious, his need to keep me close, to know everything about me. He brought me a small gift one day, an intricately folded flower that matched the shade of my tattoo. "It's you," he said softly, placing it in my hand. The gesture was delicate, precise, as if he had memorized every detail of what I liked. I noticed how he mirrored my gestures unconsciously, as if we shared some silent rhythm. Sitting together in silence, I felt exposed, like he was peeling back the layers of my defenses with every passing second. I found myself answering him faster, canceling plans just to see him. My thoughts spun around the idea of needing his approval, craving that sense of being understood, of belonging. Sometimes I wondered if I was just adapting, molding myself to meet his emotional needs, or if I was losing bits of myself in the process. I started to confuse fear with devotion, the way his eyes lingered too long, or how I hesitated before crossing a line I didn't understand. And yet, I told myself this was love, that it was protection, that I was safe in his presence. But deep down, a quiet voice warned me danger lurked beneath his tenderness. I felt myself slowly dissolving into him, losing the edges of who I was, unsure if I'd ever find my way back. I couldn't shake the thought that, perhaps, obsession was masquerading as care, and I was already caught in the web, unsure whether I was holding on or being pulled in deeper. If obsession feels like protection, was I ever really safe? And at what cost was this fragile intimacy built? It was as if an unseen hand kept adjusting the edges of my world, smoothing out the sharp corners that once defined me. I noticed it when he suddenly appeared at my door, saying I was in the neighborhood, as if my schedule was no longer mine to control. His visits became more frequent, less surprising, always under the guise of concern or love, but each one felt like a subtle intrusion, a quiet tug on my independence. I'd find myself checking the clock, wondering if I should answer his texts, or worse, avoiding my phone altogether, afraid of what he might say next. His voice notes came in constantly, a soft hum of questions. Where are you? Who are you with? Always knowing, always watching, even if he never explicitly said so. Sometimes I'd catch myself hesitating before replying as if my own thoughts betrayed me. He started suggesting I spend less time with friends and family, claiming they stressed me out, that they made me anxious. I'd nod, feeling the weight of his words settle like a heavy blanket, muffling my own voice. My days began to align with his whims, meals scheduled around his preferences, my rest hours dictated by an unspoken agreement I didn't realize I was making. It was in these small shifts that I began to notice the distortion of my memory. I'd recall a conversation, only to have him deny it, gently, almost apologetically. "I never said that, babe." "You're misremembering again," he'd say, as if my mind was a faulty mirror, capable of twisting what was real. I'd get confused, my thoughts fragmenting into hazy pieces that didn't quite fit anymore. My world felt like a painting smeared with watercolors, colors bleeding into each other, shapes losing their clarity. Days blurred into one another, and I felt like wallpaper peeling in a room no one cared to notice anymore. My instincts began to shut down, replaced by a cautious rehearsal of responses. I canceled plans without explanation, laughing when I wanted to cry, hiding parts of myself out of fear of provoking him. I told myself he was just scared to lose me, that his control stemmed from love. But sometimes in the quiet moments I wondered if I was the one disappearing, dissolving into a version of myself that he could mold. Inside, I was caught in a paradox, fighting to hold on to who I was, yet desperate to keep the peace. I kept telling myself that I was safe, that I was just overreacting, but the fog grew thicker with each passing day. I could feel the walls closing in, not with violence, but with a gentle, persistent pressure that made my world smaller, quieter. It was as if someone had turned down the volume on my life, leaving only faint echoes of who I once was. And so I ask myself now as I sit in this shrinking space if this was love, if love could feel like an invisible cage. Why do I feel so alone inside it? Each time I stay silent, I wonder if I am choosing peace, or if I am surrendering a part of myself that I'll never get back. Every small act of surrender felt like a quiet victory at first, like I was doing it out of love, out of a desire to keep him happy. I deleted the social app one used to connect with friends, convinced that my time was better spent focusing on us. It seemed innocent enough, a simple step to show I cared. But each time I pressed delete, I felt a little piece of myself slipping away, as if I were erasing the part of me that thrived on independence. Still, I told myself it was just a gesture of devotion, that I was choosing him over meaningless distractions. When he didn't feel like going to my birthday dinner, I stayed home. I told myself it was okay, his mood was more important. I skipped my own celebration, even the small moments I'd looked forward to all year. In that silence, I felt a strange relief, as if I'd finally made space for him, as if my joy was just noise I didn't need. But inside, a dull ache grew. Every time I chose his comfort over my own, I wondered if I was losing my voice, if my happiness was just an echo of what he allowed me to have. I stopped wearing the necklace I loved, the one I used to think made me feel beautiful. He didn't like it, said it was too flashy, too attention-seeking. So I hid it at the back of a drawer along with a small painting I'd kept since childhood, tucked away and forgotten. I told myself I didn't need those things anymore. I told myself I was doing this for peace, for harmony. But deep down, I knew I was giving up parts of myself, little by little, without even realizing it. He'd praise me when I was silent, when I agreed, when I didn't protest. "You used to be more loving," he'd say softly, almost regretfully, as if I'd somehow become less deserving of his affection. I started to believe that obedience was a form of love, that if I just did enough, I'd be enough. I smiled for him, but I don't think it reached my eyes anymore. I felt like I was becoming the version of myself he wanted, calmer, quieter, easier to control. My phone stays on silent now, as if I'm trying to block out the noise, my own voice drowned in the steady hum of his expectations. I avoid the mirror, afraid of what I might see, someone I no longer recognize. My reflection feels distant, like a stranger I'm not sure I ever knew. Sometimes I catch myself thinking, am I still me, or just the version he needs me to be? I used to believe love was about freedom, about connection. Now I wonder if it's just about giving up, quietly, without resistance. Every small sacrifice leaves me feeling more hollow, more uncertain of who I am beneath the layers of compliance. I can feel her slipping away, just a little more each day. And I can't help but wonder, how much more can I lose before I forget who I was to begin with? I woke up to a strange silence, as if the world had dissolved overnight. The room around me felt unfamiliar, shadows stretching and curling like living things. I reached out, but my hand felt distant, as if I were grasping at someone else's reflection. I avoided the mirror, afraid of what I might see, perhaps a stranger staring back, hollow and unrecognizable. My mind was foggy, and I couldn't remember what day it was, only that I was supposed to remember something important, but it slipped away each time I tried to grasp it. Sometimes I would dream of escape, running through endless corridors filled with whispering voices, trying to find my way out. But I'd wake up paralyzed, frozen in the dark, unable to move or scream. The sensation of being trapped seeped into my bones, blurring the line between waking and sleeping, reality and nightmare. I had no choice but to surrender to whatever was happening, even if my own thoughts felt like they belonged to someone else. He was there in every corner of my mind, reshaping my inner world with quiet, ruthless precision. "That never happened," he'd whisper, dismissing memories I clung to. "You're being dramatic," he'd say, erasing the truth with the calm certainty that made me doubt my own voice. He took my contacts, those fragile bridges to the outside, and deleted them, claiming it was for my own good. My phone's wallpaper changed overnight, a new image replacing the familiar, as if my entire visual world was being rewritten. My journal vanished, replaced by a fresh one, its pages blank, waiting for his words to fill them. Even my playlist was replaced, a new soundtrack of curated songs he had made, drowning out the echoes of my past self. Inside, I felt split, two voices fighting for dominance. One still loved him, convinced that his control was a form of care, that I was safer under his watchful eye. The other was quiet and trembling, desperate to break free, screaming in silence. My thoughts often felt like they belonged to someone else, as if I was reciting his truths, not my own. It was like I was being rewritten in his handwriting, each thought carefully curated and erased at his command. Sometimes I wondered if I was still me at all. Maybe I hadn't vanished yet, but I could no longer remember the girl I used to be. Her face was fading, replaced by this new, fractured version that fit into his carefully crafted illusion. My voice sounded foreign, even in my own mind, a stranger's whisper echoing in the hollow chambers of my consciousness. If I was still inside somewhere, hiding behind these shifting walls of doubt, I couldn't find her anymore. I was losing her, slowly, quietly, until I wasn't sure whether she had ever existed at all. My reflection no longer moved with me. When I looked into the mirror, the face staring back seemed ghostly, like a faded photograph, blurred at the edges as if someone had wiped part of her away. My eyes felt distant, hollow, as if they belonged to a stranger. I would catch glimpses of myself and wonder whose face I was wearing, or if I was even still wearing one at all. It was as if the glass had become a window into a dark, shifting void, where my identity flickered and dissolved. Sometimes I'd find handwriting I didn't recognize, scrawled words that looked familiar but felt utterly alien. I'd stare at the paper, trying to recall the voice that had written it. Was it mine? Or his? My thoughts twisted into knots, memories slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. I'd ask myself, how long have I been in this room? A day? A week? Or was it longer? Time no longer obeyed any natural rule. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in and out, as if the space itself was alive, waiting to swallow me whole. His voice haunted me, echoing in the quiet corners of my mind. Sometimes I'd hear it whisper when no one was near, soft, seductive, insidious. It sounded like my own thoughts but layered with a darker tone, as if he had infiltrated my inner world. I'd catch myself responding in my head, agreeing with him, even when I knew I shouldn't. It was as if he had planted himself inside my voice, making me question whether I was still speaking or if he was speaking for me. The environment around me subtly changed. Photos that once filled the frames vanished overnight, replaced with blank spaces or unfamiliar images I didn't remember hanging. Clothes I'd never seen before now hung in my closet, fitting oddly as if someone else had chosen them for me. My playlist shifted without my input, melodies I'd never selected now echoing in my ears, creating a dissonant soundtrack to my unraveling mind. Everything felt like a parody of my life, rearranged and rewritten by unseen hands. Deep inside, I sensed his presence, even when he was absent. His voice now echoed in my thoughts, louder than my own. I'd wake up with fragmented memories, scenes I couldn't trust, feelings I couldn't place. Were they my memories or were they his? I started questioning everything, even my own reflections. My mind was no longer mine. It was a battleground where his influence seeped into every corner, every thought, every whisper. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker of resistance, tiny, fragile. A scrap of paper hidden in a drawer with my handwriting on it, a childhood memory that surfaced, jarring and out of place. It was a brief reminder that I was still somewhere inside this fractured shell, buried beneath layers of manipulation. That faint spark told me that I hadn't completely lost myself yet. There was a whisper beneath the silence, a faint, trembling voice that sounded like my own. I clung to it, desperate to believe I was still in there somewhere, fighting to stay alive. I knew I had to find a way to remember who I was before I forgot completely. Because if I didn't hold on, even that whisper might fade into nothingness, swallowed by the darkness that was inching closer every day. And I wondered, could I still find my way back, or had I already lost myself in the shadows? A sudden, overwhelming wave crashed over me, unbidden and relentless, as if my mind had shattered from within. I was standing in the middle of the room, but suddenly I felt weightless, as if I was falling through a void. My vision blurred, colors bleeding into each other, and my breath caught in my throat. It was as if my entire sense of self had been peeled away, layer by fragile layer, leaving only a hollow shell trembling in the darkness. And then I saw it, something I had missed before, something that sliced through the fog like a jagged knife. A small crumpled piece of paper tucked into the corner of the drawer. I reached for it with trembling fingers, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst through my chest. The paper was a fragment of childhood, a scribbled note I'd written long ago, a word I'd thought was lost, an old nickname only I used, a secret I buried deep in my past. But now it was there, inscribed in my own handwriting, as if I had written it yesterday. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor, clutching the paper like a lifeline. How could it be here? How could I have forgotten? Or was I never meant to remember? The realization hit me like a thunderclap. Nothing I believed about myself was true anymore. My memories felt like a house of cards, trembling and vulnerable, ready to collapse at the slightest touch. My reflection in the mirror was distorted, my face gaunt, eyes hollow, like I was watching a stranger's reflection, not my own. But the woman staring back at me wasn't real. I could feel it. Something was wrong. The woman I thought I was had been erased, replaced by someone else, someone I didn't recognize. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came. Instead, a strangled cry escaped, hollow and muffled, echoing inside my own skull. In that moment, terror took hold, seeping into my bones. The walls seemed to pulse with a sickly rhythm, and my mind was spiraling into chaos. Had I always been this fragile? Had I ever truly known who I was? Or was I just a ghost, a puppet dancing to his silent tune? The thought haunted me with icy certainty. I was losing grip. Maybe I had already lost it. And yet, amid the chaos, a small, stubborn flicker of clarity remained. A whisper, faint but persistent, cutting through the noise. What if I wasn't just losing myself? What if I was already gone? Perhaps I had been a ghost all along, drifting in someone else's version of reality. This wasn't fear anymore. It was surrender. The final surrender to the truth I couldn't deny, that I'd been broken long before I realized it. I stood there, trembling, fists clenched, trying to hold onto some shred of myself. My mind was a storm, and I was standing at its edge on the brink of complete collapse. I considered running, hiding, calling someone, anyone, to save me from this sinking abyss. But I didn't move. I just hovered there, suspended in a fragile limbo. And in that silence, I whispered my own name, my real name, hoping desperately that it still belonged to me. But the words felt foreign on my tongue, like a ghost trying to remember its own voice. Something inside me cracked, an invisible fracture that I couldn't see, but I could feel. And for the first time, I didn't flinch when it did. I stood in the silence, fists clenched, whispering my own name, trying to remember if it still belonged to me. I was making tea, the familiar ritual now tinged with a strange calm that felt almost comforting. My hands moved automatically, pouring hot water, reaching for the mug, as if I could drown out the chaos with routine. But then I saw it, the message blinking on my screen, clear and foreign. Are you okay? I stared, my breath hitching. Who was this from? I hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't received a message in days. My heart pounded as I scrolled, as darting over the words, over the sender's name, unknown yet somehow familiar. And then it happened. A photo appeared on my screen. A picture I couldn't remember taking. There I was standing in a room I didn't recognize, eyes wide, lips parted in confusion. The lighting was wrong, off in a way that made my skin crawl. My reflection in the mirror seemed distant, distorted, like it belonged to someone else. I blinked, and the image flickered, replaced by another. Each new photo was more unsettling, images of me in spaces I'd never entered, doing things I'd never chosen. My mind spiraled, fragments of memories twisting into strange shapes. I remembered brushing my hair, my hands moving with a rhythm I didn't recognize, automatic, robotic. The pattern felt prescribed, rehearsed. I caught myself glancing at the shelf where a picture frame was turned slightly askew, something I never touched. And yet, it stared back at me, a mocking living thing. Its glass seemed to shimmer, alive with silent accusations. A faint whisper echoed in my mind. I remembered a phone call I never made, a conversation I had no recollection of initiating. My closet held a dress I was sure I'd never bought, hanging there as if it had always been part of me. When I looked closer, I saw my own handwriting, altered, warped. The familiar curves now jagged and cold, as if someone else had been holding my pen. The room around me seemed to shift, walls stretching and contracting like a breathing creature. The familiar ceiling, the worn-out carpet, none of it felt real anymore. It was as if my entire environment had been staged, a set for a play I'd been unwittingly starring in. The illusion of my life crumbled silently, quietly, revealing the truth I had refused to see. He never loved me. Not truly. Every smile, every touch was a carefully constructed lie. Every I love you was a lock clicking shut, sealing me inside his prison of obsession. I realized I'd been built, molded, shaped into what he wanted, an echo of himself, a reflection he could control. The love I believed in was just a facade, a story he wrote with my skin as paper. A cold wave of terror washed over me, settling deep into my bones. I was not the girl I thought I was. The love I thought I'd earned was just a cage. I wasn't his partner, I was his creation. And now that realization carved itself into my mind, sharp and undeniable. I felt the rupture inside, a crack that threatened to shatter what little remained of my sense of self. My breath hitched, trembling as I stared into the mirror. My reflection stared back, distorted, unfamiliar. I whispered my name, but it sounded alien, a ghost of who I used to be. The silence around me grew heavy, oppressive, as if the walls themselves mourned the loss of the girl I once was. Something had broken, and I knew I couldn't go back. I had to find a way out, to sever the ties that had bound me. But I didn't know if I could still trust myself, if I could trust anything anymore. All I knew was that I was no longer willing to be the puppet in his silent shrine. I was starting to see through the illusion, and that was the first step toward freedom. I waited until I heard him settle into sleep, then I reached for my phone, trembling. The screen's glow felt like a forbidden secret in the darkness. My hand shook, fingers trembling as I tried to unlock it, as if my own body had become a stranger. Every breath I took was shallow, each heartbeat pounding in my ears like a countdown. This was it, my chance to break free, to send a message, to reclaim some fragment of myself. But even as I pressed the screen, doubt gnawed at me. What if he was already in my head? What if the silence itself was a trap, another layer of his control? My mind spun wildly, racing through every warning, every moment I'd felt watched. My fingers felt numb, disconnected from my own intentions, like they didn't belong to me anymore. I had to do this. I had to try. I slid my hand toward the door handle, hesitant, as if the act of leaving might shatter the fragile illusion I'd been living inside. The hallway stretched before me, dark and endless, each shadow a potential trap. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, my senses dulled by fear and exhaustion. Was I still myself, or just a puppet dangling on the strings he pulled so tightly? I took a careful step forward, then another, heartbeat echoing in my ears. Every creak of the floor felt like a warning. I was acutely aware of how fragile this moment was. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. My mind whispered, what if he wakes up, or what if I get caught? The thought of being discovered, of being pulled back into that suffocating silence, made my stomach churn. Still, I moved slowly, desperately trying to maintain control, knowing I might never get another chance. Suddenly I saw it, the small hidden camera he'd installed in the corner of the room. My stomach clenched. His eyes, hidden behind that tiny lens, were always watching, even now. I froze, my breath hitching, realizing how deep his reach was. Every step I took felt like stepping into quicksand. I reached out, trembling, and grabbed a broken piece of the mirror frame I'd shattered earlier, the sharp edges jagged and cold. With trembling hands I tore a page from my journal, one that still had my real name, the one I'd nearly forgotten, ripping it free as if tearing away my own identity. I thought I could make a clean escape, that I could destroy the symbols of his control. But as I pulled at the page, the sound of a door creaking behind me froze me in place. My body stiffened, every muscle tense, heart pounding louder than ever. I spun around, nothing. Just darkness and silence, but I knew better than to trust it. I saw the remnants of a torn photograph on the floor, a faded memory of who I'd been before all this. I crushed it under my heel, feeling a strange, bitter satisfaction. Yet I was still trapped. Exposed. I knew he'd notice. I could feel it, the weight of his presence inside my mind, waiting to pounce. I had cracked the glass, broken the mirror, but I could still see him staring through the fractured shards. The truth hit me hard. I wasn't free yet. Not really. And when he found out what I'd done, I wasn't sure I'd be ready for what came next. I didn't run. Not yet. I just stood there, trembling, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might give me away. My hands were trembling as I clutching the torn page, the one with my real name scrawled across it, now crumpled and stained with tears. The room felt frozen in time, silent except for my ragged breathing and the distant hum of the street outside. I knew he was still asleep, but I could feel his presence, heavy and watchful, even in sleep. It was as if the walls themselves were listening. My mind raced back to everything I'd uncovered, the shrine in the locked room, filled with her photos, her clothes, her voice echoing from recordings I'd never heard before. The truth was too cruel to accept. I had been living inside a lie, a puppet fashioned from someone else's memories and fantasies. I had been molded, shaped into a ghost of who I once was. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, eyes hollow, face unfamiliar, as if someone else had stolen my face and replaced it with a mask. I looked at the journal, now empty of my entries, but I remembered every word I had written in secret. Every fear, every confession. I clenched my fists, feeling the ache of betrayal and hope intertwined. I had tried to escape, to tear myself free from his grip, but in the end, I knew I was still trapped. His control seeped into every corner of my mind. Still, I had one final act, something to reclaim what was mine. Slowly, I moved toward the window, the night outside stretching endless and dark. I reached out and grabbed a lighter from my pocket, the small flame flickering alive in my trembling hand. I lit the corner of the torn page and watched as the flames devoured the words, the paper curling and crackling in the darkness. As the flames grew, I whispered aloud, "This is my name. This is who I am." It felt like a prayer, a curse, and a goodbye all at once. The fire burned bright, illuminating the room with a flickering glow, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. I let the flames consume the last remnants of his control, the last remnants of her. I watched the ashes fall to the floor, and for a moment I felt a strange sense of liberation, bittersweet and fragile. I had taken a piece of myself back, even if the scars remained. He stirred behind me, and I felt his presence like a cold breath on my neck. Silence stretched between us, heavy and unspoken. I knew he was awake now, watching me, waiting for me to break or to submit. But I didn't turn around. I simply took a deep breath, steadying myself, and whispered my real name, something he could never erase again. A declaration, a promise, a plea for the future I could now begin to forge. As I slipped out the door and into the night, I knew I'd never fully forget what he did. The memories would haunt me, shadows lurking in the corners of my mind. But I also knew I had taken back a sliver of my truth, that I was still here, still fighting. Maybe I didn't survive him completely. Maybe I never would. But I survived enough to whisper my name in the dark, louder than his voice ever was. And as I walked away, I carried the weight of it, everything and nothing, knowing that sometimes liberation begins with a small, quiet act of defiance. Even now, when the echoes of his shadow linger in my mind, I whisper my name louder.